Hello, welcome back. Very, very happy to be here chatting to you again today as normal. Now, I've been starting the podcast recently with a little update on fat loss, a little update on life. We still obviously have the puppy. He is like a puppy I've never experienced before. I think I had collies and they were such tryhards, so easy to train, but they were constantly like, what can we do to please you? And then we got our German Wirehead Pointer, which was a real eye-opener because he was a challenge, bless him. I love him to bits, but gosh, he was a challenge to those puppy into even up to about 5 years old. And then we've got Atlas, who's a lab cross staffy, and he's got this real trainability, but also an element of stubbornness. So if he thinks I haven't got a treat, he might just sit down and go, "You're right, actually, thanks. I think I'll just sit here." Or when I think, oh, I'll go and have a cuddle with the puppy, he's like, "Whoa there, you're being a bit needy now. I'm just going to take myself off to my crate." And I'm like, oh, but he's very cute and very lovely. And he does seem to be food driven, which I think is a good thing. Now, my own fat loss phase, and I'm updating you because I've done some measurements and my waist measurement, everything has come down, but the scales recently have gone up. I know. And it's one of those things because I know a lot of people experience this. And I think this is why we take other forms of measurement, because you're not going to be getting smaller and gaining body fat, but the scales don't always tell the whole picture. But along with this increase in scale weight, I have been really struggling with my back. And also I had a really crooked neck as well. And the reason I mention this is I was going out for my Saturday run, my brunch run, which I love. And the week before, I'd felt fatigued doing it, but I still loved it. You know, it's still nice being out. It was a hotter day, lovely. Then last week, I went out and I felt okay physically, as in, I didn't feel really tired or anything like that. But as I was running, this pressure in my lower back just started to build and build and build. And I was like, oh, it's not happy. It's not happy at all. Now, this is something that can happen with me. And it tends to happen when I'm a bit run down. And then I started getting this bit of neck pain as well. And what it's highlighted to me is that there's clearly some inflammation going on in my body, but also it's highlighted to me that the focus needs to change a bit. Not that I'm not going to focus on fat loss. I think sometimes we think if we're changing tacks, we're giving up. No, I'm still going to be focused on it, but I'm taking the pressure off and I'm going to be focusing on recovery, because I think sometimes we lose track of what our body's actually telling us. I likely won't need to be going to my minimums loads, but this week I have eased up that intensity on my run. And actually I went for a run today and I didn't track it because I thought the temptation then is to push. So I didn't track it. I just went and I tried to run steadier than I felt like I needed to, and it felt good. So that is good. But I'm just easing up on the pressure of those types of things. And I'm focusing on recovery. I'm making sure that drinking enough water has come back into the equation. My sleep actually has been much better the last few days, but I think it really is looking at whether we've just been on and wired for a little bit too long. So our body will often give us signs. And I think my body has given me a little bit of a sign at the moment in that it needs me to ease up. We've been busy recently in a good way. And I just think that now we've got a bit of a quieter time, a little bit of a reset, slow down to speed up. And that is going to feel good. And so I'm going to go into this next little phase, the reset with my members, feeling calm, collected, in control, because clearly my body is telling me that it's not quite as happy as it would like to be. And the reason I know this can happen, those of you that have only just started listening might not know my history, but I traditionally have not been very good at listening to my body. And back in 2014, I was just pushing through. I was mum to young boys. You know, my boys are 16 and 14 now, but I was pushing through. I was wondering why everyone else seemed to be finding everything easy and why it felt so hard for me. And I was carrying on running and so on and so forth, teaching at the time. And I got a sore throat. And I followed that advice of, if it's above the neck, then it's fine. If it's below the neck, then you need to rest. I took that a bit too literally. I didn't think about the fact that if you're feeling tired, systemically fatigued, that is also below the neck. I just thought it's not a chesty thing. Anyway, I carried on trying to run. I carried on trying to do things. And about 2 weeks later, And I did go to the doctors actually because I had a really sore throat. 2 weeks later, I started getting really severe joint aches and pains. I couldn't walk. That's how it started. I couldn't get up off the sofa one night. And that was quite scary. It was really weird. And I guess the muscle had gone into spasm around that area of my back that I still get little flare-ups in now. And then over the next week, it migrated to different parts of my body. I was getting swollen feet as well. Anyway, ended up going to A&E after kind of going back and forth to the doctors, and was diagnosed with something called rheumatic fever. And it's an autoimmune condition. It's very retro, it's very rare. But at the time, I felt like it was because I hadn't been given antibiotics, of course. But I don't think I would have got that if I had listened to my body when it was tired, if I'd focused on recovery as well. So now my body does give me these signs, and I do try and listen, because traditionally I've been somebody that will try and push on through regardless. And I think that can happen when we're mums. And I'm not just saying just for mums, but I think as we get older, I guess, there's things that we've always been able to do. And then we expect to be able to always do those things. But then we get other responsibilities as well, and they add on top. So we're just adding more to the list. We've always been able to do this, but now we've got to do that and this. And it carries on. And actually, yeah, I know that we used to be doing that, but now we've got kids and all of these things going on, work, etc. And perhaps we need to do it in a slightly different way. So I've learned, it's taken me a long time, but I am learning to listen, especially with that lower back, because it is no fun when it is twinging in the way that it can. Anyway, and without further ado, I think it's time we got onto the main episode. So I had a message recently from someone saying, have you done any podcast episodes on self-sabotage? Because I just find myself knowing what I should be doing, but still eating these, for her, it was bags of crisps and so on. And she's like, I don't even know why I do it, because I don't feel like I need it, but I still do it. And I think this is really common. So of course I thought, I have talked about the reasons we overeat and so on, and they do overlap with this, but specifically self-sabotage, not so much. And I'll explain why in a minute, but we are going to go into the reasons why this might happen. But I think this is incredibly common. And I know I've done this before. You know that you have a fat loss focus, and you'll see in the cupboard the chocolate or the crisps or whatever it is that you want, and you've managed to pause. This is the thing. It's not a reaction, because you're managing to pause and you're like, I don't really want it, but I'm still going to have it. And that can be really confusing for people. And I think firstly, the thing I'm going to challenge is the term self-sabotage, because are we really self-sabotaging? Self-sabotage makes it sound like you just don't want it enough, right? And every woman I know does. And it's more that they don't understand why it's happening. And there's always a reason why something happens. And so we really need to look at what is going on here and learn from it, because there are quite a few different things that could be going on, but I don't think any of them are going to be laziness or lack of motivation. And this is what we're going to explore today, because if we're repeating a behavior again and again, I think it does normally serve some form of purpose. There will be a reason we're doing this. And if you listen to all of the things I say today, all of the possible reasons, and you find yourself at the end going, oh, it could be a few of those, just start paying attention to when it has happened. Think about the day you've had, think about the week you've had, think about the period of time, and then we can go from there. The first one we're going to talk about, and the one that I think is often overlooked, and I say overlooked, it's not that you don't have an awareness of it, it's that you might not recognize this in yourself. And that is that you might genuinely just be hungry. And one of the reasons I think this can happen is because we understand that when we are in a calorie deficit, there might be an element of hunger. So we think we should just be able to push through this hunger by maybe distracting ourselves, doing other things, and that this is an expected part of fat loss. But there is a big difference between a little bit of hunger between meals and feeling genuinely underfueled for the lifestyle that you're living, for everything that you're expecting yourself to do that during the day. And what can also happen is, because people are expecting this hunger to kick in the evening, and I definitely used to do this, they will often save their calories until the evening. So we're less hungry in the morning. That's normal. We're often happy to eat less. And often women will use this and think, well, I'm less hungry in the morning, so if I just skip my breakfast, I'll then feel like I can have a little bit more in the evening and in control of that. But then they're busy during the day. They might be having a lot on at work, and they might find that they can't really sit down and eat a proper meal at lunchtime. So they're just picking and grabbing. And then they get to that evening meal. It's the first time they've sat down properly during the day. And then afterwards, they're still hungry. And it doesn't make sense to them as to why they'd still be hungry, because they've just eaten a full meal. There's no reason for it. Stomach feels full, but they are still feeling hungry. And at that point, it is the buildup of that restriction kicking in. And it's not just, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but it's not just the amount of calories you've had, it's the nutrients that you've had as well. That feeling of being satiated at different points in the day. And I think the other thing that can happen is we skip that breakfast, for example. We then get a little bit hungry. So we end up having some biscuits or cake mid-morning. And then because we've had that, we feel like we shouldn't have lunch because we've already had all those calories. So we need to make sure that we don't eat anything. So then we're pushing through that next bit of hunger. And then we get to the evening, eat that meal, still hungry. And I know that it doesn't make sense when you're standing in front of the cupboard and you're saying to yourself, well, I shouldn't need this. But it is really, really, really hard to push through with willpower when hunger has built up in that way. And I don't mean stomach rumbling hunger. I mean restricted feeling that can just kick in. And it's the reason why I always say about eating your meals. And when we looked at the habits of people that had lost a significant amount of weight and sustained it, having breakfast was one of the habits that they had. I know there is a big thing about intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding, it's often called. And that is often done in a way where people will skip their breakfast and then they'll eat their lunch and their dinner and then stop eating through the evening. I don't think it's a bad thing to say to yourself, oh yeah, I'm going to have 12 hours of not eating, give my body a bit of a break from 8 to 8, whatever. I think that's absolutely fine. But when we look at time restricted feeding or intermittent fasting, the way that you would approach it if you were being optimal, if you really wanted to do it, would be to have breakfast and lunch and then not eat late in the evening. That would be the better way of doing it. But it doesn't tend to lend itself well to family life. And I see it again and again and again, talking to women, and they'll say that they've tried everything with regards to health, fitness, diet, and they are intermittent fasting because they feel like it's going to work, but they've never actually looked at eating 3 meals a day routinely. So that feeling of hunger as being a reason why they overeat doesn't enter our thoughts because it's really hard to look internally. And instead, we feel like we need to create these parameters so that we have got less time to eat. And you know what? Having less time to eat is going to bring your calories down, and you might well sustain that for a decent amount of time. But if you are going to do it, I would still be looking at getting decent meals within that window and making sure that those meals are nutritious as well as much as you can, because otherwise you will at some point start to feel over restricted. So do it if you feel like it works for you, but be aware of what you're eating during the day, because at some point it will catch up. I also think that when we're looking at one number with calories, that there is a danger that we don't realize what we're doing through the day can make a difference. And specifically because there are apps out there that will say to you, what weight do you want to be? And you go, oh, I want to be that weight. Just pluck a weight from my 20s and say, yes, that. And it goes, when would you like to be at that weight? And you go, well, I think I'd like to be there in 6 weeks, please. And then it goes, cool, okay, you will need to lose on average this amount of weight per week, which can be quite restrictive and not very sustainable. So then you've got this one number that you're aiming for that doesn't necessarily account for the fact that you might well be moving more some days than others. MyFitnessPal definitely does it. So it sets the calories low and then it gives you more calories back for exercise, which I don't love anyway. But regardless, if you're doing an app where you're typing in what you want by then and it gives you really low calories, it could be that your expectations of achieving that weight within that amount of time are unrealistic and unsustainable. So it's looking at making sure it's a healthy amount. But what I was going back to all over the place today is the fact that you might be more active some days than others. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to change what you're doing too much. But it's another reason I like a calorie range, because if you are out doing long walks during the day, you're very active, steps are super high compared to normal, you're probably going to be more hungry. And the danger at that point is that then you can end up just eating back any exercise, any work that you've done because you feel over restricted. So I find this on my long runs. If I'm not careful, if I don't fuel myself within a certain window around my long runs, I end up overeating later in the day, and not overeating with the nice, nutritious food, overeating with foods that are fast fuels, high carb, high sugar, high fat things are what I would crave. So it's hard to ride through that if you're feeling restricted. And our body tells us in funny ways. And one of the biggest complaints around all of this is that constant food noise that people will talk about. And constant food noise isn't because you lack willpower. Sometimes it's just that the body thinks that food is scarce. And that can be because you are being too restrictive, or you're not getting the nutrients in that you need in those meals. It's craving something, right? But one thing that can really confuse people is they're like, I'm not over restricted. I'm eating during the day my calories. I'm eating enough. I should be eating 1,800 calories. And I actually sometimes am eating 2,000 calories, but during the day, I'm eating enough. And then technically, when you're still getting enough calories, satiety is still going to be a big part of this, because there's a big difference, right, between not being starving and actually feeling full. It's why I love high volume foods. And actually, I've got one that I'm putting out today, I think, that is super high volume, and you'll feel like you're very satiated afterwards. But it's also why I like to focus on meals versus snacks. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but we can start snacking, and technically there are enough calories going in, but it's not satiating. We're never actually feeling full. It's partly why I embrace the no crap cake condition. There's a big difference between picking a little bits of cake all day and sitting down and enjoying the same amount in one go. That feels quite indulgent, but equally satiating. The other bits, it's almost like we're trying to pretend it didn't happen. We feel a bit out of control, and we've never actually enjoyed it. But also, along with the meals that we're eating, if we're stopping for a moment and we're actually having our breakfast, our lunch, and our dinner, along with that comes the warmth of the food if it's warm, some time to stop, the texture, the flavor, the chewing that we're doing, the actual visual amount. You can actually eat quite a lot in one meal for 500 calories, and it can feel super satisfying. In fact, it can feel quite indulgent how much you're eating in one go if you've planned it right. And that is going to help you sustain your hunger far longer than the same amount of calories split over a period of time. There's more to this with the meal thing, because the thoughts of self-sabotage, I'm going to use the term even though I don't think you are trying to sabotage yourself. Another reason for this is because we're just getting those foods that are on the go. Often we tend to go more towards the carb heavy meals. Protein and fiber, I'll go on and on about it again and again, especially if you have a fat loss goal, are going to keep you fuller for longer. The fiber in particular can add quite a lot of volume to our meals for low calories. So if we're adding loads of veg or grains or pulses, we're creating a really nice high volume meal. And by high volume, I mean lower calories per gram. So you're getting lots of grams, but it's lower in calories. Protein absolutely helps us feel fuller for longer. And having a high protein breakfast, if you're not already, can be game changing for how you manage your hunger going through the day. You're not feeling like you're playing catch up with nutrients as the day goes on. But it doesn't need to be complicated. I think there's this belief that we're trying to get protein and fiber at every meal, that it's not always easy to do. And I totally understand that. But when I'm talking about having 3 meals a day, they don't need to be complicated meals. They really, really don't. In fact, I would encourage you not to have complicated meals. So I do prep my breakfast in advance. At the moment, I'm going through my overnight oat phase. It might change at other points. I'm also prepping the Eve's breakfast pudding that I created because my son loves it. But the point is, breakfast is prepped in advance just to make life easier. But lunchtime, I also do prep my lunch in advance. But I think this is a time where a lot of people will just be like, shit, I haven't thought about this, and just grab something on the go. I'm at work or I'm out. We can actually quite easily have a high fiber, high protein lunch by just grabbing a chicken sandwich and an apple or a pear. I did some examples of days in my app recently, not as something, a meal plan that people need to follow, because we want to find what works for you. But I do think it it's nice to see that over the course of the day, what 3 meals can look like, and realizing it doesn't have to be insane calories. You still have room for a snack there easily as well. But some of the examples I gave for lunchtime were things like beans on toast with some yogurt and honey on the side. And that didn't even come to 500 calories. So that was 2 bits of toast, wholemeal toast, a bit of spread, and some beans, obviously, baked beans, and then some 0% Greek yogurt with some honey as a side. That would feel really quite filling, less than 500 calories. The other suggestion I gave was the chicken sandwich and an apple. Again, I believe it was less than 500 calories or around 500 calories, decent amount of protein, decent amount of fiber. I think sometimes we feel like we have to have these prepped meals that we see online, that we see other people doing, and we're like, oh my God, I need to put hours aside for meal prep. And you absolutely don't. You really, really don't. And I think sometimes that messaging can make it feel inaccessible. But having enough in one meal during the day and that meal at breakfast time, that can really, really help how you're feeling later on in the day. You might still want a snack there as well. That is okay. But it's just making sure that you get opportunities to feel full and satiated. And that is also with the nutrients, not just the amount of calories. Not all calories are created equal. Now, I will say there's no such thing as a bad food, and there isn't. And I'll refer back to the no crap cake condition, less often, more endurable. There are some foods that you will want to eat less often because they're not going to keep you very full for very long. And actually, the more ultra processed foods, and I'm saying it in a case of you will likely still have these in your diet, and that is okay, but you want to have this awareness around them because these are foods that are much easier to overeat. We tend to eat them quickly on the go. They have this really satisfying taste. It makes us want more, and they are less likely to fill us up. So the more whole foods that you can have in your day, or the minimally processed foods, the fuller you will feel from that. But the other things, they have their place. And it's just being aware that if you're having a bar and some crisps at lunchtime, a protein bar and a packet of crisps, whatever, it's likely not going to fill you up for very long. And it's not going to have that overall food volume, even if technically you're still getting a decent amount of protein. And the thing that I want you to take from this section, and it does kind of link to that feeling of hunger because it is about satiety in general, is your brain really does like meals that feel like meals. And we quite like routine. We do like to know when our breakfast is coming, when our lunch is coming. And I think we can get used to that. Like, oh, I get hungry about here and she gives me food. I get hungry again here and she gives me food. Our body likes routine. It really does. Circadian rhythm, and then that rhythm around eating as well. Right. So the next one that I want to talk to you about is a big one. And I think it might be the thing I talk about most. I spoke about it in the last podcast. And here we're talking about that feeling of being good, saving calories, weekday restriction paired with weekend overeating. Now, I do talk about having a calorie range, and that is to avoid this all or nothing thinking that we can get. But if you were doing it in an extreme way, you might be going super low with your calories during the week and then going very, very high with your calories at the weekend. And what we want is to avoid those extremes. But the weekend overeating can bring that all or nothing thinking and that perfectionism. So Monday to Friday, we're very, very good. And then at the weekend, it tends to fall apart. And what is happening here is what researchers would call cognitive restraint. And it's basically you're using a lot of mental effort to control your eating. And you're constantly thinking about what you can and can't have. And then, of course, food rules are going to become mentally exhausting when you have to think about them all the time. It's like you're constantly relying on willpower as like a handbrake to stop you. And eventually that handbrake gets very tired and worn out. And eventually something happens that makes you go, fuck it, let go. And then everything you've been holding back just comes rushing out. But what we need to understand with all of this is the stricter the rule, the more rewarding the breaking the rule can feel. So we get a bit of a buzz from breaking it. I know it sounds weird, but if you spend all your week telling yourself you absolutely cannot have chocolate, when you finally do have it, it feels like this huge release. It feels like freedom. It feels amazing, which is why it can be so hard to stop then at that one piece. And then what happens is when perfectionism breaks, which it will do because life is going to happen, you start feeling really guilty. You feel like you failed. Then you get that, oh, I might as well feeling like, well, I've already messed up, so I might as well just keep going and I'll start again on Monday. And it links back to something I talked about in another episode recently. If your plan only works on your most organized, calm, routine week, it's likely too restrictive. It's too rigid because life isn't always going to feel organized. It is going to get messy at points. There are going to be weeks where things don't go to plan. It's why in the reset at the moment, even though we're aiming for our optimals as much as we can, we still have minimums to fall back on. There's this whole area of study around rigid restraint versus flexible restraint. And I want to just again explain the difference here. So rigid restraint is when you have really strict rules. I cannot eat chocolate. I will not eat chocolate. I'm not going to have any snacks this week. I cannot eat after 7 p.m. I must hit exactly 1,500 calories. No exceptions. Everything is black and white. You're either being good or you're being bad. Flexible restraint is when you have these guidelines, but you can then adapt them to fit your life. It's what the minimums help do. So yeah, you might be aiming for protein and fiber in each meal the majority of the time. But if there is a breakfast that ends up being slightly lower because of circumstances out of your control, it's not the end of the world. You're just aiming for the majority of the time. It's a no crack cake condition. You know, I can have cake, I can have chocolate, I can have these things, these more indulgent foods, but I'm going to do that sometimes, not all the times, and make sure that it's when I really want it at a time where I can enjoy it. And I'm not going to want something more later. And those things are absolutely fine. There really is room for life to happen alongside fat loss. Flexible dieting approaches are genuinely associated with better long-term outcomes, both physically and psychologically, than the rigid control. And I know that this can be hard if you've been somebody that's been rigid before, but rigid control works brilliantly until it doesn't, and then it falls apart, whereas flexibility bends. And I think the issue with it is that when you're thinking about diets that have worked for you in the past, you're thinking about things that have been rigid, but you haven't sustained them. So it feels like they worked, but it worked until it didn't. But you can actually make fantastic progress by having a slightly more flexible approach. So if you're finding that you keep having these cycles of being very, very good and then completely losing it, I doubt it's that you lack discipline. I think it might be that your approach is too rigid for your life. It might be that you're spending too much mental energy on rules that eventually you just can't hold on to anymore. So I actually asked on my Instagram stories this morning how people feel about self-sabotage when they see it happening in their life. And there were people that were saying that they get to a point where they feel like things just aren't working anyway. And I think this is such a huge part of it because as humans, we repeat behaviors that feel rewarding. So if you feel like you're putting in loads of effort and you're just not seeing much back, eventually your brain can start going, what even is the point anyway? And I think the biggest thing that can drive this is our over-reliance on the scales. I know I've spoken about this before, but body weight is going to fluctuate for so many reasons that's not body fat. Hormone stress, poor sleep, digestion, inflammation, a bit too much salt. All these things can temporarily push your scale weight up. And I know I can say that to you and you can know it, but it doesn't mean it's easier to deal with it. And I think what can happen is people can have a higher weigh-in and then emotionally interpret that as failure. So they think, well, I've been good all week and it's not working. The scales are out. So clearly I'm getting something wrong. And then it becomes this justification to eat the takeaway, raid the cupboards, or just stop tracking completely and just give up for a bit and then start again on Monday. And actually, I think a lot of you aren't self-sabotaging because nothing is happening. You're self-sabotaging because you think nothing is happening. And that's why I like taking other measurements and progress alongside the scale weight, because often the scales aren't going to give you the whole story. If your measurements are changing, if you're looking different, if clothes are fitting better, something's happening. And I've been thinking about how we should look at scale weight recently, because I'll often say to my members, look at your lowest weight of the week, because we're more likely to get a false high reading than we are a false low reading. Which is true because of the reasons why we might get that high reading. But actually, it would be good if we looked at it as a range. If we go, okay, my highest that I go to at the moment is this, and the lowest I go to at the moment in a week is this. And then over the weeks, we want to see our highest number and our lowest number go down with the awareness that it's still going to fluctuate. So even our scale weight can become a range that we're looking at. But I also got a response from someone that was almost on the flip side, saying that when things feel like they're going well, they almost relax and think, oh, great, that's fine. It's working now. And they ease off and then regain the weight. And this makes sense as well psychologically, because humans naturally relax effort once they feel like progress is happening. The problem is if the whole approach has relied heavily on urgency, motivation, strictness, or willpower, and the habits haven't really become part of the normal life yet. And then once that immediate pressure disappears, old patterns can start to creep back in. And that easing off isn't because someone doesn't care. Sometimes it's just because they're exhausted from trying to maintain an approach that doesn't actually fit with their life long term. I think that's a good question to ask yourself. Can I see myself doing this in a year's time? Like eating this way? Are these meals I actually enjoy? And it's why I think progress goals that focus on the actions that you want to do consistently and those routines are going to matter so much more than purely relying on motivation or that fresh start feeling or the scale outcomes, because motivation is going to go up and down and scale weight is going to go up and down, but routines are the things that can keep on carrying you through, that you can fall back on when that fresh start motivation starts to dwindle. Because once you start feeling discouraged or defeated, it's often where we then have that stress and emotional eating starting to become part of the picture too. So now I want to talk about stress and sleep, because this is where so many people are just trying to white knuckle their way through. The thing with sleep is that when we're not getting enough of it, it doesn't just make us tired. It is actually going to increase the hunger signaling to our body. So when you're sleep deprived, your brain is going to send stronger signals for food, particularly the quick energy kind. It's looking for a shortcut to feeling better. So it makes you crave sugary, high carb, high fat foods. Yep, those ones. And the food that is going to give you that quick hit. And stress is going to do something quite similar. So when we're stressed, your brain is going to want that quick relief. It wants comfort, something that feels really rewarding right now, immediately. And then those high rewarding foods become appealing because they are going to give you that immediate sense of relief or pleasure that your stressed brain is so desperately looking for. And the weird thing here is that often we'll get that from that first bite, and it's the next bites that are just chasing that feeling, but we're not getting it anymore. And of course, stress is also going to have an impact on our overall bandwidth. We only have so much decision-making energy in one day. And if we're using it all up on work, on family stuff, or whatever else is going on, then by the time we get to our food choices, we're running on empty. We just don't have the mental energy to make the harder choice. Decision fatigue is real. I love talking about it because I think we all suffer from it. And for those of you that don't know what decision fatigue is, it's all those teeny tiny decisions, no matter how small, that add up during the day to the point where we then just feel like we can't make one more decision. It's the reason, apparently, that Barack Obama wore the same clothes each day. He was removing a tiny decision so that he could focus on the bigger, more important things later on. Even small decisions made in advance can have us feeling so much calmer. But decision fatigue, emotional eating, comfort seeking, they're all real feelings. They're not character flaws. They're very normal human responses to being stressed and tired. So when you are feeling exhausted, your brain is tending to prioritize the immediate comfort over long-term goals. It doesn't really care about those long-term goals. If you've read the book, The Chimp Paradox, it will talk about the chimp taking over. You have your chimp and your human, and you've also got the computer. In theory, the computer is the thing that kicks in immediately autopilot. It's going to go with those well-practiced habits. The chimp is that reactive. And the thing to remember here is it's easiest for us to fall back on what we've practiced the most, even if that isn't necessarily optimal. It's familiar, it's comfortable, it feels easier in the moment. That is going to be what the chimp chooses. The computer is also going to be running those autopilots because it's not practiced the other things so much. We really want the human to be able to kick in as much as possible. And when this happens, it's not because you're being weak. It's your brain just trying to find the easiest way possible. It's trying to help you survive right now. It's not thinking about next month or your goals in the future. And I think it's very important for you to remember at this point that you are making food choices inside very busy lives, very tired brains, when overstimulated, when your nervous system is kind of high alert. It's not in the ideal conditions, not when everything is calm and perfect and you've had optimal 8 hours sleep and stress is at zero. that's not realistic all the time. Sometimes you might feel like that, but real life is being able to make these decisions after a really busy, perhaps stressful day at work. You're feeling a bit overstimulated. You come home, the kids might be asking your help immediately. You're making dinner, and then maybe you get your kids to bed and you're winding down in the evening. You sit down on the sofa, absolutely exhausted. That is when your brain is then going to go, right, we need something nice right now. We've earned it. We deserve it. And sometimes that will look like a lack of discipline or a lack of willpower, but I think that's just a very full brain and exhaustion. You're tired and your brain is just trying to keep you going. And I think sometimes at that point, we would be just better off going to bed. I think sometimes when we're craving that extra energy, we're doing it to keep ourselves awake. We're wanting that fuel so we can stay up just a bit longer. It's asking for something to help us right now. And something I used to do, because it does then take us into, is it a habit that we're getting into after the kids have gone to bed or winding down? I used to pour myself a glass of wine. I wasn't drinking loads. I was having a glass of wine, but it was most evenings. It was not helping my sleep. It was not helping my recovery, but it felt like a reward for a challenging day. It took me some time to really slow down and realize that this was not necessarily optimal if feeling good was my goal. So if you are in a place right now where sleep is bad or stress is high, it might be that you need to focus on those things first, more than restricting calories even more or trying to be in a consistent deficit. It might be that you are better off taking the pressure off, like I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, and focusing on the recovery elements, because sometimes we do need to slow down in order to speed up. It's not that you're not going to be focused on fat loss. You're just trying to make it easier to do. It is so hard when you're feeling mentally on edge for whatever reason to then make good choices around food. And actually, that is where those routines come into place, because even though my body is going, Ruth, you need to take a bit of break recovery wise, I'm feeling pretty good mentally. I feel pretty good, but I have those routines to fall back on. So I am eating my meals that I've planned in advance. I feel like my habits are now less about what I'm eating each day and more about my routines. So thinking about what I'm going to be eating the next day in the evening, prepping a little bit of food on a Sunday. So I'm not there going into each day thinking I've got to be in a calorie deficit today. My routines just help me do that anyway. Now, of course, sometimes it isn't lack of sleep. Sometimes it isn't that we're hungry. Sometimes we might just be in this habit of winding down in a certain way in the evening. It's like the triggers. TV comes on, I'm hungry. And that's what we're going to be looking at next. And I think this is the part of the podcast where things do get really practical and useful for you. So habit loops, put very simply, is that you've got a cue, a behavior, and a reward. Now, the cue is the thing that is going to trigger the habit. TV turns on. The behavior is what you do, grab a glass of wine, and the reward is what you get from it. Feel relaxed. But it might be that it's something else, the sofa, you sit down on the sofa, that equals snacks. Your brain goes, oh, we always have snacks when we're sitting here. TV could equal chocolate for you. Kids go to the bed, like I said, it equals wine, maybe crisps, or work stress equals opening the takeaway app. There might be loads of little triggers that you have that create these habit loops, but they're not random. They are patterns that over time our brain has learned. And our brain is incredibly good at learning patterns because that is how it's going to save the energy. It doesn't want to have to think about everything all the time. So it creates these shortcuts, these things that while they might be optimal, we've practiced them so many times that they are the fallback. But the interesting thing is when a cue becomes predictive, our brain then starts anticipating the reward before you even get to it. So when you sit down on a sofa, your brain is already releasing a little bit of dopamine in anticipation of the snack it normally gets. It's already expecting it. Sometimes the craving can start before the food is even there because your brain has learned the pattern so well. It's a little bit like the Pavlov dogs. Now, I don't think they did actually ring a bell, but it's a little bit like that. Your brain has learned that this cue leads to that reward and it's already ready for it. And habits then get stronger when they're repeated under the same conditions again and again. Same sofa, same TV show, same time of night. The more consistent the pattern, the more automatic it becomes, which is why it can feel like you're doing it before you've even decided to do it. It's just full on reaction. You've sat down and suddenly you're halfway through a packet of bourbon biscuits, talking from experience, of course, without even really thinking about it. And I think once we understand that these are habit loops, we can then start to interrupt them because it is possible. And there are some very practical ways you can do this. Now, these won't work if the issue is hunger alone. Okay. So I'm just saying that now. So the first one is that we want to increase the friction, make it harder to do. There's this idea from a book called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but basically, if you make something 20 seconds harder to do, you're much less likely to do it. So you make unwanted habits harder to perform. So that might be keeping snacks that you know you're going to reach for upstairs instead of beside the sofa or on a high shelf. And I remember an example he used in the book was that he would put his TV control upstairs so he wasn't watching TV in the morning. But you might also portion things out before you sit down rather than bringing in the whole packet, or uninstalling the delivery app from your phone so you actually have to make the effort to log into the website to order the food. These might sound very small on their own, but they work because in that moment when you're tired and your brain is looking for the path of least resistance, if the path to the snack drawer upstairs is harder, you might just not bother. And I also remember in the book where he was putting the TV control upstairs, he then bought in the thing that he would prefer to do. So he put his trainers there. So he was like, reminding himself that he wanted to go for a walk instead of watching TV. So he's made it easier to go for the walk, harder to go and get the TV controls. Even if putting on the shoes takes the same amount of time as going upstairs and getting the controls, in that moment, putting on the shoes felt like the easier task. The next one I want to talk about is creating a pause. There are so many different ways we can create a pause. One way is just surfing the edge, having this condition saying that I will wait at least 15 minutes before I have that thing that I'm craving, because the belief is that an urge will last around 20 to 30 minutes. So if you can commit to waiting at least 15 minutes before taking that thing, then it might naturally peak and subside. So it's like a wave. The urge is going like a wave. So you're surfing that. But there are other ways as well. And one of the things that I'll say to my members, because often when we're craving those snacks, we might be craving them because we want that little dopamine hit. We want to feel good. And there are other things that can bring us that. So this is where you might add in doing 10 squats first. And I want to be clear here, not doing 10 squats because you are punishing yourself or because you're trying to earn that food. You're not making yourself suffer before you're allowed to eat. It's actually more about feeling good. And we're interrupting that autopilot. You're creating space between the urge and the action. So you're giving yourself a natural pause and giving your brain a moment to catch up and go, hang on a second, do I actually want this? Or is this just a habit? And actually, are the squats making me feel better on their own? The pause is the main point, but the squats might also have a benefit. But it could be that you also have a glass of water first. Say to yourself, I have a glass of water, and if I still want it afterwards, then I can, but have that first. Brush your teeth after your evening meal, because we're less likely to want to snack on something if we've brushed our teeth. That's definitely going to make us pause. You might decide you're going to pause by putting in an action of walking around the room first or dancing to a song first. Sometimes you'll do the pause and you'll still want the thing that you were craving, and that is fine. But sometimes you'll do the pause and realize that you weren't actually that bothered anyway. And the thing is, if you still want it, it could be a hunger issue. If the pause has been enough to break that autopilot and you don't want it anymore, then it could well be a bit of a habit loop. The other thing that we can do is replace the reward. And this is very important. Your brain usually wants something. It's giving you a good reason to do it. It might be a stimulation, comfort, that transition between work and home, decompression, reward, relaxation, just something. And food is really good at providing a lot of those things, which is why we reach for it. So is alcohol. But it's not the only thing that can provide them. And this is where something like one of my favorites, which I never would have said years and years ago, is knitting. Something that keeps your hand busy. It's quite soothing. It occupies your hands. It's something that's quite calm. It feels ritualistic. And it means that food doesn't have to do all that heavy lifting anymore. And the interesting thing is that I mentioned knitting here, but it's really anything that keeps your hands busy. Often when we're sitting down and it is a habit, it's like we're sitting there and going, what am I going to do with these? We're looking for things to do. We might go on our phone. We might be picking at things. And if we end up doing something else with our hands that doesn't require too much effort with our mind, whether that's colouring or painting or knitting or something else, maybe a Sudoku puzzle, I don't know, something that can keep your hands busy. It can be enough to break that habit loop, because keeping our hands busy does tend to calm our minds. It's why we give kids in schools fidget toys. Those overactive kids, the ones that can't stop moving, give them something to do with their hands and they can calm down. And we are very much the same. And I think sometimes when we're watching TV and we're wanting to sit still, we will be looking for something to do with our hands. We can also look to make those desired habits easier. So on the flip side of making the undesired ones harder, we can make the desired ones easier. The good habits stick. Make them as easy as possible. And this is mentioned in Atomic Habits, which is a fantastic book if you've not read it. So it could be fruit visible on the counter if we want to eat more fruit. Protein can be prepped and in the fridge. Yogurt could be easy to grab, or walking shoes by the door. Having some meals that are really easy, your go-to meals that you can repeat without having to overly think about it. This is why I like to do a habit of do one thing this evening to make tomorrow easier. And that might be thinking about breakfast. Anything you can do to make the desired outcome easier. And I think we know ourselves really well. So if you are somebody who tends to sit down and watch TV, but you really would like to go for a walk, can you say to a friend, oh, do you want to meet for a walk this evening? But if you are struggling with what you think is self-sabotage and you think it is a habit that you've got into, then think about what you would rather do instead and then make that easier. So instead of reaching for food, when you're watching TV and you want to be painting or knitting, can you put that on the sofa in advance? If you want to be going out for a walk, can you put your trainers there instead? If you think, well, I am still going to snack in the evening, but I want to snack on something healthier, then you can bring in those things of having some fruit chopped and prepped. So it's a bit like a fruit salad. So you've got something nice that you can go to that will feel like a bit of a treat. One thing I'm really enjoying at the moment is those yogurt jelly things. And I don't really traditionally like the flavor of foods that have like aspartame or, sweeteners in them. And I wasn't keen on the idea of having that sugar-free jelly, but mixed in with the 0% Greek yogurt, it was quite nice. And it's like 70 calories and it still kind of gives you that sweet feeling in the evening. So that having something else as well can help. And if you are struggling to get your protein in during the day, then having some prepped chicken only at the start of the week so that you can reach for that in your meals and add it to whatever other sources you've got, that can be a really great starting point. So make it easier to do the things that you want to do. The thing about books like Atomic Habits, when they're talking about habit stacking, they're not talking about you just adding more and more and more onto your life so that it's going to feel kind of harder and more overwhelming. It's not just thinking about, I want to be going for a run, so I'm going to go for a run when I'm already doing this. It's about those habits as well that will make it easier to do the things that will make you feel better. So this is now one of my favorite things to talk about. I feel like I say that a lot because I love talking about all of these things, but this one in particular is something I'm very passionate about, because we're going to talk about food scarcity. When foods become forbidden, bad, or only for cheat days, guilt foods, they often become more emotionally charged and they take up more space in your brain. You think about them more all the time. You want them so much. And this is partly down to something called psychological reactance. Basically, humans naturally want things when we're told we can't have them. Yeah, we're difficult like that. It's like when someone tells you not to think about a pink elephant, and then suddenly all you can think about is that pink elephant. When you put a food onto the forbidden list, you're essentially telling yourself you can't have it, which makes your brain go, well, now I really want it. It becomes this thing that you're constantly thinking about. You're constantly resisting it, constantly trying not to have it. And I know that years ago, I would give up certain foods for a period of time. And the interesting thing was, like, I'd give up biscuits. I'd say, I am not going to have any biscuits this month. But then my head would go, you cannot have biscuits, but you can have cake. And it was like it created this need for the other things more as well, which is weird because I probably was having more cake than I ever would normally have had because I had this weird scarcity mindset. But it is a scarcity mindset. It's that I've blown it, I might as well keep going. I'll start again Monday that we've spoken about. Or I'd better eat loads of this now because tomorrow I can't have this. I'll be back to being strict again. Things like after Easter, saying to yourself, okay, well, Easter weekend will have happened and I don't want to be having chocolate going forward, so I might as well eat all of the chocolate now. It really is that feeling of I need to get it in now while I can, which I know logically doesn't make any sense, but I think we've all done it at some point. And it's where that no crap cake condition comes in again. You can have the thing that you really want, but make it less often and more enjoyable. Make it intentionally. And then you build flexibility into your approach so that nothing feels forbidden. There's no panic. There's no urgency. There's no Last Supper mentality where you have to eat all of the cake now because you're starting a diet tomorrow. And the thing about the no crap cake condition is that it doesn't just apply to cake. It applies to all indulgent foods, wine, chocolate, crisps, all of those things. But it also applies to other things that we might be struggling with, the things that we might feel like we can't say no to. And I think at this time of life, we do want to have the things that we love over more of the things that are a bit shit. So I'd much rather spend my time doing things that I find really enjoyable than filling it, rushing here, there, and everywhere, doing things that don't necessarily make me feel good. And that applies to food as well. So I'd much rather have my Belgian bun on a Saturday than pick at the bang average crap during the week. And don't get me wrong, when I'm getting really tired and drained, I will want to pick at the bang average stuff. And I will now and again have a biscuit. But if I'm having a biscuit when I'm feeling in control and it's a choice, I don't feel like I need to eat 10 biscuits because I'm not going to be allowed them tomorrow. It's making a conscious choice and saying to myself, I can have this, but I'm going to sit down with a cup of tea and enjoy it. And I think the pushback that I get with the no crap cake condition the most is people going, but I love all cake. There is no crap cake. Literally, does that mean I just eat it all? And it's not just about that. You might be in a baker's and might say to yourself, this is all incredible. But it is about making a choice and also asking yourself, well, can I sit down and enjoy this right now? And will I enjoy something more later? Because I think there's always going to be one cake that you enjoy more than another. There's always going to be one that's better for you. And there's also always going to be a good time, because if you're in the rush and you're eating it on the go, you're not enjoying it as much. It's not going to be as satiating. And we did speak about that a little earlier. But when food stops feeling scarce, it often stops feeling quite so powerful, having this hold over us. You can have cake. You just don't need to have it every single day or in huge amounts, because you know it's not going anywhere. It will be there the next time you want it. You're not banning it. So then that urgency disappears, it goes away. I'm not just saying eat everything you want whenever you want and hope for the best. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm talking about making a choice over reaction. It's planned inclusion, flexibility, and it's removing any drama around it. It's reducing this binge restrict cycle that can happen, or over restriction, overeating. You're choosing to have these foods as part of your life, because while food is fuel, some food has another purpose. Sometimes it is just enjoyment. Now, I'm going to get a little bit physiological now. This is an area that I really wanted to cover in this podcast, but it's a little different from the other areas. If you've been in a calorie deficit for a long time, your body can respond. It can adapt. And it's not in this starvation mode way where everything is shutting down. That isn't what's happening, but your body does become more efficient. The body increases the signals pushing you towards food. You feel hungrier more often. Food thoughts can become louder. And at the same time, the signals that usually tell you you're satisfied can feel weaker. It can feel harder to feel properly full. And your movement can also sometimes unconsciously decrease a little bit. And here we're talking things like the NEAT, the non-exercise activity. So you might fidget less. You might choose the lift instead of the stairs without even really thinking about it. You might find yourself just sitting down a bit more, moving around a bit less. Little things that your body is doing to conserve energy, and often without you even noticing it. Essentially, your body is trying to close the gap between the energy coming in and the energy going out. It's adapting to what it perceives as a shortage. And it doesn't know you're trying to lose weight for your summer holiday. It just knows that energy has been low for quite a while now, and it's responding to that. And it's also worth knowing that the leaner someone gets, the harder fat loss often feels, and that's biologically. So when you've got a bit more body fat, your body is going to be a bit more relaxed about letting go of it. When you're getting quite lean, your body starts to hold on tighter. It's more protective. the hunger signals can get louder. You see this with bikini athletes quite often. The food focus gets stronger. And this is often the point where people start feeling like they're failing, because they think that if they were really disciplined enough, it shouldn't feel this hard. And like I said, I'll often use that example of a bikini athlete because it illustrates the whole thing really well. These are people who are getting incredibly lean for a show. And what happens afterwards is that they struggle with this extreme hunger and they can feel like they're losing control around food. And it's not because they're weak or because they've failed in any way. It's because their body has been in a really significant deficit for a long time, and their appetite signals are incredibly high. Now, being in a deficit for a while isn't inherently bad, and I want to be very clear on that here. If you're taking a flexible approach, you're going to have some higher days, some lower days. Those are normal, and you can keep going with that for a sustained period of time. And then how much body fat you have in reserve is also going to matter. The severity of the deficit is going to matter here. Your mental state, how you're feeling, is going to matter, and how long you're doing it matters. And I do want to also add some nuance here, because long-term fat loss itself is not automatically a problem. If someone does have more body fat to lose, a slower, more flexible approach over a longer period of time can be a very, very sensible and sustainable approach. The issue really is not simply the length of time, it's the severity of the restriction, how lean somebody is getting, and how much psychological strain is involved, and then whether their whole life is starting to revolve around food. And the reason I mention this here is because it can often feel like self-sabotage, but it isn't. They're struggling because they've dieted consistently for too long. They're struggling because they've spent years in cycles of being extremely restrictive and then falling off again and then back in that yo-yo. Or maybe not even a yo-yo, just a long time of being in a deficit when getting quite lean. But there can also be signs that this is becoming a problem. You might be getting obsessed with food. Your mood might be lower. You might start to have anxiety around eating, feelings of constant hunger, feeling cold or tired all the time, or losing control around food when you do eat, and then socially restricting yourself because you're worried about what you might eat, and that perfectionism getting worse. So if you're seeing those signs, it might be time to ease off before it gets any worse, and just to adjust and realize what's happening, seek help if you need it, but give your body a break. Let those hunger signals calm down and let your brain stop being so focused on food all the time. Your body doesn't know that you're just trying to look good for summer. It just knows that the energy has been low for a long time and it's trying to protect you. So really, we can thank it for that. Now, we have covered quite a lot today, haven't we? And I think we need to bring it all together. The most important thing I really want you to take away from this episode is that you need to be a detective. You're not judging yourself, you're being a detective. Because the research does show us that shame is only going to worsen the spiral. One slip becomes guilt, guilt becomes avoidance, avoidance makes us feel so much worse. And then we often do more of the thing we already feel guilty about. And around it goes. So beating yourself up is rarely going to improve your decision making. In fact, arguably, it will make things worse because you feel terrible. And when you feel terrible, you're more likely to reach for something to make yourself feel better in that moment. So instead of asking what's wrong with me, ask yourself, am I actually hungry? Have I eaten proper meals today? Could I be overtired? Is it a habit? Am I doing this at the same time each day? Am I restricting too much? Am I feeling stressed? Have I made this food emotionally loaded by putting it on a forbidden list? Is my plan actually realistic for my life right now? Those things are going to be much more useful questions than just beating yourself up. I know it's cheesy, but I will say it again. There is no failure, only feedback. So if you're constantly hungry, you can eat more. If you're really tired, prioritize sleep. And if it's a habit loop, see if you can interrupt it. And then if it's restriction, it's going to be about having more flexibility. And if you've got a food that feels emotionally loaded, remove it from the forbidden list. Tell yourself the no crap cake condition. And then if you've been dieting too hard for too long, this might be a sign to take a bit of a break. Bring yourself up to maintenance and focus on just feeling good. The answer to all of this usually isn't going to be more shame or more willpower. It's understanding what's driving the behavior and building an approach that is going to work for your life. Now, I really hope that this episode has helped you see the pattern in a different light and leave you feeling a little bit more hopeful that there's something you can do about it. fat loss should be able to work with life. And there's more to your life than just fat loss. I think that's the thing we can often forget. It shouldn't feel like this constant battle. We do, especially at this stage of life, need to be able to adapt and adjust. And as always, I would love to hear from you. So if this episode has resonated with you, please do share it with someone who might find it helpful. Leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. It really does make a difference to how this podcast reaches people. Now, inside the Ruth McFit app, we have just started our reset. We're pushing for our optimals as much as we can, but we started by having a plan so that we don't give up, so that we can adapt and adjust with life, which is key. So if you want some support achieving your goals, head to ruthmcfit.com and join us, or you can reach me on Instagram at ruthmcfit and ask any questions you might have. Thank you as always. Until next time, goodbye.